Today we are talking about abdominal aorta. Before moving on to abdominal aorta proper, let's take a glance on normal hemodynamics. So these are the ventricles, right and left ventricle. On the right side we have tricuspid, on the left side we have bicuspid valves. Above the right ventricle is the right atrium, above the left ventricle is the left atrium. We have two pair of pulmonary veins opening into the left atrium. So what opens into the right atrium? Deoxygenated blood carried by inferior and superior vena cava, and from the right atrium to the right ventricle, this deoxygenated blood carried by the pulmonary trunk to the lungs for purification. And from the lungs, the pulmonary veins takes the oxygenated blood to the left atrium, and through bicuspid valve it reaches left ventricle. And here comes our ascending arch and the descending aorta. We have many branches from ascending arch and the descending aorta. Now let's talk about the descending aorta. This aorta passes through the diaphragm. So the part of aorta above the diaphragm is called thoracic aorta, which is in the thoracic cavity, and below the diaphragm is called abdominal aorta. This abdominal aorta supplies the lower part of the body, that is the abdomen, organs in the abdomen, and also the lower limb. How the abdominal aorta supplies the lower limb? It is supplied by the bifurcating branches. They are called common iliac arteries. They further bifurcates into external and internal, which supplies the lower limb. Now moving on to the abdominal aorta in detail. The aorta from the thorax, that is the thoracic aorta, this also has quite number of branches which supplies the structures present in the thoracic cavity like bronchus, lungs, esophagus, mediastinum, and so on. It passes through the diaphragm through an opening called aortic hiatus, which is at the level of T12. So the abdominal aorta originates from the level of T12 to 4th lumbar vertebra. At L4, it divides into two branches. So this bifurcation of abdominal aorta, when we see from the anterior abdominal wall, that is the surface anatomy of abdominal aorta bifurcation, it is 2.5 centimeters below the level of umbilicus. Otherwise, at the level of highest point of iliac crest. So this is the surface anatomy of bifurcation of aorta. Number 1, 2.5 centimeter below umbilicus. Number 2, at the level of highest point of iliac crest. Moving on to the branches of abdominal aorta. It is divided into 4 categories: ventral branches, lateral branches, dorsal branches, and terminal branch. Moving on to the ventral branches. So this is the surface showing the anterior side of abdominal aorta. From the ventral side of abdominal aorta, at the upper border of L1 is the celiac trunk, and at the lower border of L1, superior mesenteric artery originates. At the level of L3 we have inferior mesenteric artery. These are the three ventral branches. Moving on to the lateral branches, we have 4. And how to remember these 4 lateral branches? Just remember diaphragm. Just above the abdominal aorta we have diaphragm. And next at the level of L1 we have hilum of kidney, and above the kidney there is suprarenal gland. So just remember 3 structures: diaphragm, kidney and suprarenal gland to remember the lateral branches. The first and foremost branch from the abdominal aorta is inferior phrenic artery, which supplies the inferior surface of the diaphragm. So this is the first branch of the abdominal aorta. The superior surface of the diaphragm is supplied by superior phrenic artery, and that's the last branch from the thoracic aorta. So the first lateral branch from the abdominal aorta is inferior phrenic artery. And the second lateral branch from the abdominal aorta which supplies the kidney is renal artery. And what is above the kidney? Suprarenal gland. This gland receives blood supply from 3 arteries. Superior suprarenal artery from the inferior phrenic artery, inferior suprarenal artery from the renal artery, whereas the middle suprarenal artery arises directly from the abdominal aorta. So the third lateral branch from the abdominal aorta is middle suprarenal artery. And at the level of L2 we have gonadal arteries. Number 4, that is 4th lateral branch, is gonadal arteries. In females this will be ovarian artery, and in males this is testicular artery. So generally we call it as gonadal arteries. These are the 4 lateral branches. Moving on to the dorsal branch, we have lumbar arteries, 4 paired lumbar arteries and 1 unpaired median sacral artery. Sorry for the handwriting. So these are the branches from the dorsal side of abdominal aorta. 4 paired lumbar arteries at the level of L1, L2, L3 and L4. Whereas the median sacral artery arises just above the bifurcation from the posterior surface of abdominal aorta and it descends downwards, which is unpaired. So if you see in the midline of abdominal aorta in the anterior surface, these 3, celiac, superior mesenteric and inferior mesenteric artery or unpaired artery. From the dorsal side we have median sacral artery, which is also unpaired. Rest of the arteries, all the lateral branches, inferior phrenic artery, middle suprarenal, renal artery, gonadal arteries. These are all paired arteries. Also the dorsal branches, 4 lumbar arteries or paired arteries. Next we have terminal branches. So at the level of L4, abdominal aorta bifurcates into 2 branches, right and left common iliac arteries. Let's talk about the branches of celiac trunk, superior mesenteric, inferior mesenteric arteries in the next video.